Hi guys, welcome back to Two Worlds Collide podcast. On today's episode, we have Cop Wilson, a Canadian Special Forces operator with a 20-year career in the Canadian military, 16 of those spent in special operations. Cop has deployed multiple times to Afghanistan, Iraq, and South America, operating some of the most high-risk environments on the planet. In this conversation, we dive deep into his experiences, what it is like deploying into these war zones, and the mindset required to operate at an elite level. We also discuss his transition out of the military and what life looks like after special operations. This is a raw and unfiltered look at life in the shadows of war. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, mate, you ready to roll?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, mate, Cop Wilson, welcome to Two Worlds Collide podcast. How you going?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Yeah, good. Mate, you're my first international guest, mate, all the way from Canada, and super looking forward to this podcast, mate. You've deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, and you've done some stuff in, South of America, which I also, some narcotic stuff, which I also want to talk to you about, which is very interesting given the current state of, the Trump administration cracking down on the border and a lot of that sort of stuff, mate. So, mate, I am super excited to have my first international guest on, and I couldn't think of a better person to have it with. So, mate, welcome to the podcast. And do you just want to start off, mate, by maybe just telling me a brief bit of background about yourself? What sort of pushed you to join the military, and then, in particular, all your, special operations type of stuff as well.
Yeah, so I was 16 years old and sitting in Miss Lyons grade 11 English class in the northeast of Canada, kind of in a small French-Canadian kind of fringe English-French fishing village when the Twin Towers came down.
Yeah.
Half the rugby squad and I kind of walked out of class and we headed on down to the recruiting start. It was only a town of about 35,000 people. And we went to open the door and half the rugby squad's in there. And that was pretty cool. Of the lot of us that had kind of seen it through, there were maybe about 6 of us that stayed in as lifers and whatnot. And a number of guys turned into, they pursued a career in climbing the military hierarchical ladder, the corporate ladder, if you will. And I decided to branch off into the special operations world. And a dear friend of mine, at the same time I went SF, he went and he renounced his citizenship and went and joined the Black Watch of the British Army. So that was kind of like for me to join the military was 9/11. Always had the blood in my veins, kind of thing. Both my grandparents served. Uncles on both sides fought in World War II, that sort of thing. And my dad was a 25-year veteran and retired as a sergeant major as well. So I kind of boot camp for me started kind of the day I came out of the womb. Make sure my socks were rolled properly and all that stuff. So I was kind of bred into it. Yeah,
nice. Mate, so I remember where I was on the Twin Towers. I was 11 years old. Literally woke up. It was about 8 a.m. in the morning in Australia. My mum was getting us boys ready, me and my brother getting us ready for school. And, mate, I remember that. I watched live on TV the second plane go into the Twin Towers at the age of 11. And look, mate, in Australia, we're not really much like Canada and the US. It wasn't really hitting home for us as it would for you guys. But I do know a few people that joined off the back of that in Australia. And obviously from there, mate, Afghan flowed, Iraq flowed, and we had about 20 years of war that ended with the pull out of Afghanistan not too long ago. So, mate, you said a really interesting point there that I want to get back to. You were 16 years of age, and you literally walked out of class and went to somewhere to enlist. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. We have a kind of a special program in Canada where, much different from the American kind of National Guard Reserve program in Canada, you can join the reserves fresh out of high school or during high school, where you go away in the summer times while you go to class and whatnot during the proper scholastic year. And then in the summer times, you report to like a local reserve training base where you go through your pipeline stuff for basic military qualification and your soldier qualification. And depending on what trade you end up in, you go into your trades training generally in the second summer, so that when you graduate high school, you're already ticketed and tagged, bona fide kind of. You can go into a regular force position. You can start taking reserve contracts attached to the bigger army. I had done. They don't let anybody. Well, you can join the regular forces with grade 10 completed with parental consent, but there was no way my parents were going to let me do that. And so the closest I could get to the flagpole, so to speak, at that time was to join the reserves and feel like I was doing a little bit of something.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Mate, when you watched the planes go into the building, like, did you feel, because Canada and America, they're so closely tied to each other. A lot of Australians just sort of see you guys as the same, right? You all speak the same. You all pretty much look the same. So to us, you're the same. But mate, did you feel like personally attacked that day?
That's the first time that question's ever been asked to me. I think my 16-year-old self really had a challenge to grasp what the heck was going on. I wasn't really, for me to take and put myself back into the feelings and the senses of the places and what I was experiencing at that time. I don't think I could recall with any serious accuracy what I was feeling, but I do remember feeling very, very, I knew at that moment the world had changed forever. At least our world that we knew it here in the West. And when I say the West, I mean North America. I'll refer to that a lot because I live in the West, like in the Rocky Mountains now. So I think that's the West, but the West, I mean, like, Canada and the States. I guess I got to see a number of aircraft were diverted because we were about a 10-hour drive or so from New York and about a 15-hour drive from New York City. So many of the aircraft that were scheduled to land around places like Boston, Montreal, all these like larger city centers in and around that part of the northeast of the continent were diverted to other smaller regional or rural municipal airports. So there's some really amazing photographs of small town Canada with all these 737s lined up and all these people that had nowhere to go. They would be shuttled off these aircraft from parts unknown, and they'd be taken into houses of strangers in Canada, where they'd feed them and put them down to bed and put some blankets on the floor and nowhere for them to crash. So they just these little communities opened their doors to all these poor folks during that crisis moment. And it was kind of a point of national pride for us.
I remember I listened to a Joe Rogan podcast recently, and like after the Twin Towers incident or 9/11 happened, like even a really dynamic state like California, people would fly in their American flags. Like it brought a whole country together, and which sucks because of the incident that happened. Do you know what I mean? Like thousands of people had to die to see that crazy patriotism across the whole of America, not just in the real, let's say, like red states, as such.
Yeah, I don't think that there was much division between red and blue at the time, although I was too young to understand that and certainly not a member of the country. But I can say that it is kind of unfortunate, but some part of human nature whereby hardship and crisis often bring people of various backgrounds together, all pushing rather in the same direction of the quote unquote enemy, which I thought was like, that's really cool. And it's kind of like, it's just strange how human beings are.
Yeah, well, mate, the same thing in combat, right? Like some of the best friends I've ever had were guys I made over in Afghanistan with, because you go through fucking hell together, and you come out the other side with a bond that I don't really think can be mirrored in real life. So I completely understand where, you have this massive amount of pressure, you go through a terrible time, but that can unite people on the other side, just like going to war can.
Yeah.
So, mate, let's dive on to, some of your deployments and stuff like that. I know you went to Iraq, you've been to Afghanistan. Did you want to also as well just break it down for the audience, because you were attached to some American units, weren't you?
So we can kind of, maybe a quick history lesson. There was a cool unit that kind of was born out of the state of Montana here, where I spend most of my time now. I'm just about an hour from this place called Fort Henry Harrison. And in the early 40s, Fort Henry Harrison was ground zero for a joint Canadian and American special operations unit that was specialized to do predominantly mountain snow warfare related tasks, and then got re-rolled into some other stuff. I've got a very dear friend who owns a distillery around here, and he's got a bottle of whiskey that is 60% American bourbon and 40% Canadian rye, which is an homage to the 60%, 40% composition American Canadian of that unit. That tradition of Canadians and Americans in special operations tasks and units moving forward into today is still part of the relationship we enjoy with the 1st Special Forces Group out of Joint Base Lewis McChord out of Washington, and the regiment that I belong to, which is the Canadian Special Operations Regiment. And I had the privilege to, do a number of wing exchange jumps, and not just fun things like barbecues and travel about and go and see fun things and do cool exercises, but got to swap steel with some Taliban over the years. And, in Afghanistan predominantly, we've kept that relation alive with a number of American units as well. It's that was the most I guess my teeth cut one, because I did a conventional Army tour in 2007, but my first combat tour was an SF guy as an operator was in 2009, and me and a handful of dudes got seconded to an ODA team, an operational detachment Alpha, which is a Green Beret team of 12 dudes. They were shorthanded due to some injuries and some guys that had to be repatriated. And we had gone on some of these kind of pretty dope ass like cowboy missions that ended in chaotic gunfights where we didn't know where the hell anybody was and that kind of thing. And it was pretty cool. I can say hand on heart that the Green Beret bros that I have down here in the States are hand on heart just as close to me as any of the guys that I ever served with that have the same kind of passport I do. And as well, I've served with a couple buddies of mine from Australia as well. Most recently in Africa as a contractor doing anti-poaching, where I got to rub elbows with a very dear buddy of mine. And we stay in contact almost every other day or so since. And there's a guy from Perth. He was one of the cats. And him and I just absolutely fucking good guy. And we didn't get in any gunfights. The objective in anti-poaching is to not get in a gunfight. That's the bottom line. But you can find yourself in some pretty hairy situations, even though the bottom line is not to shoot stuff. But yeah, him and I became fucking best mates.
Yeah, Matt, I've had a few friends go over and do anti-poaching stuff as well. And yeah, mate, they loved it. They loved it. It thought it was great. A couple of guys as well through some friends of friends that I know that are now working for a business called Lantern Rescue, and they liberate kids all around the world, mate, in child trafficking. So ex-SF dudes going to that type of work as well. So they're doing work in south of the border and Africa and Southeast Asia, mate, which is, as you would know, that's a massive problem around the world, which is child trafficking. So I've had a lot of dudes go into that as well after their SF careers.
We've got a couple of projects here. Like one of the guys, he was another dude in the pool of anti-poachers. He was the dude who picked me up in Cape Town when I flew out of South Sudan. And he's a former commando guy living in Camps Bay or some beautiful place in Cape Town. That was his kind of modus operandi as well. Between the anti-poaching stuff and the counter-trafficking, he kept himself very busy. And we've got a huge issue with that here too. One of the Green Beret buddies that I got the chance to, it was kind of a strange story. We actually met when we were downrange in 2012, but never really knew it. And then we connected years later on the horseback cowboy veteran sort of side of things. He's the CEO and founder of a cool outfit around here called the War Party Movement, and they pride themselves in that their kind of mission focus is counter human trafficking, and then removing disenfranchised Native American women and putting them onto ranches, getting them some skills, and then pushing them off, maybe relocating them and their children if required to get them out of particularly squirrely circumstances or whatever there's going on at home. And they have a number of side projects that specialize and focus specifically on counter human trafficking. Even right here in Montana, it's a big problem here. There's a number of task forces that are nonprofit charity side, but they'll take guys and operate under a private investigator license, retired SF dudes, to go collect on some of these places, turn all your data over to a dude with a PI license, and then they can make that actionable intel to provide that packet to local law enforcement. It's pretty cool shit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that is, mate. I'm absolutely amazed with that world. Yeah, like I said, I've got someone coming on in 2 weeks who's the founder of Lantern Rescue, and she's the lady that started the business now that is now globally stopping human trafficking, and in particular child trafficking around the world. So, man, I'm really looking forward to that. And I love how SF dudes get into that type of work, or not even SF as well. They could just be general army guys or military guys get into that world. It's like another world of sacrifice, because mate, kids they're just vulnerable little kids.
Yeah.
And, mate, it's amazing that world still happens now in this day and age, but it's even better that there's people out there trying to combat it.
Yeah, I've had to weigh my own personal involvement in that very, very carefully, man, because I'm obviously like I've got awarded PTSD diagnoses from my time in service and whatnot, man. One of the things I have to be very careful is walking the knife edge between doing too much and not enough, like doing enough so that I feel like I'm providing value and adding value to my community, my society, but also not putting myself at risk so that I start circling tube again like I did years ago. by just giving too much of myself and not taking care of myself. So I've really got to watch that. And you're right, man. Children are a very, very hot button topic. Like, I don't have kids, I don't have a wife, that kind of thing. And so, but I do adore and want very deeply to have that someday. And for me to put myself in the front row, like front line, dealing with that sort of thing, it would probably chew my heart up. So I got to be real careful. So. Yeah.
And that's some of the feedback I get from mates as well, that they do struggle with that type of stuff. So, but, look, man, I do want to hop on to some of your post-military stuff, in particular PTSD, but I just want to rewind back and go through some of your deployments, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah,
cool. So, mate, did you want to, just walk me through maybe some of the more extreme situations that you've been in? You spoke about swapping some steel with the Taliban. Matt, have you got any like major incidents that happen, through your tours and stuff like that you can talk about?
Yeah, we had a couple of really interesting ones. One of the things that I had, because I was a big fan of watching like Funker 530, like all these old cool YouTube videos full of gunfights and stuff. And although I guess gunfights are weird, I guess, right? Like, if you have 60 dudes on a ground force with, say, a dozen partner force or something like that, and somewhere over around the 12 o'clock of the all-around defense is where the fighting is happening, but your job is to, like, observe your little bar arc at, like, the 6 o'clock, you don't see much, right? You don't have no idea how crazy it is, just 40 meters that way on the other side of the thing. It might sound big, it might not be big. It might sound really small, but, like, one of your buddies almost got his pocket shot off, that kind of thing. So gunfights are so weird. It's not, a lot of it's not like in the movies, like a lot of people think. Like, one of the most realistic ones, I don't know what you think. You know that scene in Forrest Gump when they're walking and it stops raining and all of a sudden the wood line opens up? You don't know where the fuck anybody is. You don't know which direction it's coming from. They're like, they're over there. Over where? Like, it's so chaotic and you can't hear anything. You don't know what's going on. A lot of it's kind of like that. Having said that, the conventional forces kind of engagements that I've been a part of were much larger muscle movement, maneuver element kind of things, where you were backed by a whole bunch of dudes. When it's a soft operation, although you have much smaller people because you have a lot of stacked assets, predominantly air, and an intelligence picture that's more or less as real time as it gets, you have a much better idea of what's going on with fewer assets to influence the battle space, if that makes sense. So I had kind of found the soft ones were a little bit more cut and dry, although the battle space itself and the ROE packets are much more gray, which is just a whole bunch of fucking weird words to say that you kind of know more what's going on, but it's gray area, so much gray stuff. Like, no, we're not going to shoot a guy in the back running away, but no, we're not going to do this also. And it's just, it comes down to the individual thinking, feeling, professionalism, and mastery of basic skill sets of the individual operator. And that's why we get those interesting sort of mission sets. Having said that, that's nothing that probably 9 out of 10 conventional Army grunt dudes wouldn't be able to figure out, given the fact that they get a little bit more training and they're surrounded by guys that think and feel and act mostly the way they do. We had my Iraq tour, which was my last one, was probably, that was the coolest one of them all because the rule book was so thin. Like, mature theater, the rule book is like this thick, right? A new theater, the rule book's like this. And if there's a rule in the big rule book, it's because someone has done something that makes higher ups write a rule that you're not allowed to do that anymore. Whereas in Iraq, if there was no rule about it, we could just fucking figure it out. And we got in a couple really, really interesting ones because it was not the asymmetrical warfare that we were used to in Afghanistan, like counterinsurgency, unconventional warfare style tactics against like a smash and grab, hit and run Taliban that would just melt into the populace as soon as we would roll up. This was like a no shit, several 100-kilometer long sandbag wall across Kurdistan, and everything on the other side of the sandbag wall fucking died if it moved. It was wild. It was like, but there's only like 11 of us with maybe 1,000 partner force on call, and we would just sit up there and smoke stuff. And that was against ISIS in 2015, 16 kind of time frame. And the last big gunfight we were in was about 36 hours long, and it, excuse me, combined everything from the enemy using poisonous chemical weapons to indirect fire to, up armored bulldozers that had like paneling and plates and stuff welded on it so that we couldn't shoot through the husk to get the driver, that kind of thing. It was out of this world. And I was a JTAC on that trip. And And yeah, we got a lot of bad guys in that one day. But it was also super hush-hush because we weren't supposed to be in combat there. So nothing really came about it in the news. We got like 4 lines in the local newspaper at a national level, and that was about it. Like, it's pretty wild. Yeah.
Wow. That's mate, that's some pretty heavy stuff, especially with ISIS. You know, like I had a special forces friend that did trips to Afghanistan and fought against Taliban, and also Iraq as well. But our limitations in Iraq were quite heavy in regards to special forces guys going there. So it was more just training up their special forces guys. So I don't really think that they got into too much action over there. But one of my mates said, you know, ISIS, mate, they are just, they're savages. Like with the Taliban, you know, like you can almost, like they're running a country at the moment, right? So like they do have some type of diplomatic side to them. With ISIS, they just want to kill everyone except themselves.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the brutality of ISIS at all?
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things I try to be very specific with when I detail some of these stories is I try to talk about things that are in my lived experience. So if I didn't see something with my own 2 eyes, I'm usually pretty hesitant to say it. But we had heard all kinds of reports, like it, as much folks have heard back here too, like they were throwing homosexuals off of bridges or buildings, you know, throwing acid in the face of little girls, like all kinds of just awful things. And one of the things that we did know, and I can say this from lived experience, is that the majority of the ISIS fighters that we had encountered, at least in the small sectors that I had the privilege to operate in, most of those guys didn't come from Iraq. We were able to identify Tunisian and Egyptian and all these other crazy sort of accents from all about the Caliphate area, right? Like guys from North Africa and guys from like, you know, some of the Muslim parts of northeastern Europe, like former Soviet bloc, Georgia, Tbilisi, Chechen, that kind of thing. So we were able to pick up all kinds of different accents. Although I didn't see any of these guys, I can't tell by looking at a dude if from Chechen or not. But it is weird when you see like a white ISIS fighter. That's wild.
Yeah, wow.
You know, some of these kinds of things. So we did have a lot of different nationalities around the ISIS kind of sphere that were kind of in that location and that were active on a number of occasions. Most of the engagements that we had at that time were outside of our organic surface weapons kind of distance. So 90% of our stuff was mortars, and I would drop bombs on it. Yep. With like some of the other guys in the team, it was like spot. Like if we just sit there with like optics and do OPs in the mountains, or we would occupy like overt style OPs for the all intents and purposes. Like we'd be drawing fire. The bad guys would see that we were there, so they would kind of focus their efforts or focus their weapons or their optics or their attention on us, and we would be able to use various assets in our disposal to kind of isolate where those dudes were and then bring fire to bear upon them.
Yeah. Yeah. So how long did that tour go for?
That one was a little over 4 months. We were on really short rotations just because of some stuff that we had on the go back home. Just trying to keep our rest, refit, and redeploy cycle kind of tight as possible because we had some other missions about the planet that were kind of not higher priority, but they were of similar priority, and we had to keep our guys rested and rotating in and out as efficiently as possible. And we felt that a 4-month rotation for that sphere was the way to do it. After that, it had gone to 6-month trips.
Yeah. And so how much of your military career have you actually spent overseas deploying?
Little over. So so on combat operations, a little bit over 2 years altogether. Wow. And then and when I say non-combat operations, I mean some of the weird kind of low-key gray weird shit in like Latin America, about 3 years or so. And I did 19 years, just under 20 years in service, and 14 of those years were in special operations. Yeah,
wow. So a pretty distinguished career then, mate.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Let's go back to Afghanistan because look, I know a bit about that. So whereabouts in Afghanistan did you deploy?
So my first trip over with the conventional forces was just outside of Kabul. I was staying on a British Army camp called Camp Suter by the airport, and that was mostly like conventional forces. I would drive around in an up armor vehicle, but it was more like a G-Wagon with like blast blankets you'd sit on, and we'd go about delivering people and moving parcels. We used to call it the Kabul Taxi and Parcel Service as a joke. I think I turned 20 on that tour, and that was my first tour. Never got in a gunfight. we got like rocketed, but that was about it. Everybody gets rocketed, but it wasn't like, that was my first trip. My second trip over, I did selection in between that tour and my next tour, and that was in Kandahar province. We had a FOB just outside of Kandahar city, and we operated predominantly in the KC environs. So we didn't do a whole lot, if anything at all, in KC proper, Kandahar city, KC proper. Most of our stuff was in the Arghandab River Valley or the Zari Panjway and things like that, and majority of those particular mission sets were all fly-in, where we had a lot of rigged compounds at the time were the kind of the hot button topic of that season. So instead of landing on the Y and patrolling in several kilometers to do a stealth to contact hit, we would just we'd land 2 Chinooks on the roof of this fucking guy's house and just beat his door in. So we didn't have to walk anywhere. It was awesome. And you'd catch them in their bed, sleeping and run away. And it was pretty cool. I felt like a badass. On that tour as well, we did probably the 6 coolest weeks I've ever spent in the military. We did 2 long-range mobility patrols. And those were awesome. We'd bear down the Humvees with all this ammo and your rucksacks hanging on the side of it. And we'd go around and we'd mess about the Afghan, Pakistan, Iranian border, trying to find bad dudes running women and guns into the country and dope out and money. And that was cool. It was, I don't know how effective it was. I don't really know. I didn't really care. Honestly, I was just doing my job. I was a driver on a cool camping trip with machine guns. So it was pretty sweet.
Yeah, mate. Did you love that part of the military? Like, being out in operation, did you really thrive in that environment?
Yeah, it was my favorite, man. They always have this cheesy kind of saying, like you're either a garrison soldier or a field soldier kind of thing. The SF community, there was like guys that didn't do so well in certain training environments or whatever, but you'd get them downrange in a small tactical infrastructure. And these guys would just be the best guys around, like they kept their stuff tidy and they were never a pain in the ass to wake up to go on shift. And if you needed a hand changing garbage bags or, climbing up a building during shift or get an extra set of eyes on something, they're always just kind of great. I found myself to be the most useful in those environments as well. I liked the adversity and I liked sharing that hardship with my buddies. Because that's where I found my use was, if nothing, I could be trusted to be able to stay awake and have a good attitude and use my mastery of my personal skills, my professional skills, when the chips were down kind of thing. And that was kind of really where I felt like I contributed most to the team was on operations. Yeah,
that's cool. It's cool that you talk about, that bonding point as well, where you probably found some of the best friends you've ever had on those tours, and you would probably stay in contact with them now. That's what I find as well, mate. Some of the guys that I've been to Afghan with, I call them, weekly, and we check in on each other to see how we're going. And other military guys as well. I've got all my friends back in Adelaide. I just still, stay in contact with them a lot. But it's the military guys that call me every week, or we're always checking on each other. And it's forged on the battlefield. It really is.
Yeah. I had found when I was in uniform, obviously guys will get out for various reasons. But when I was in, about 90% of my buddies were in uniform in the service and 10% were veterans. And then as I transitioned out, I'd found that now 90% of my buddies, my close hold friends, are all fellow veterans that have retired, and about 10% of them are still in. And I had found a lot to learn, because one thing they do when you sign up to be an operator and you go on a course is they teach you everything you need to know. But when you transition into civilian life, they don't teach you anything. They just here's your money, good luck, Yep. So I've really had to lean on the backs of my buddies who are further down that trail than I am in the retirement game. And it's only because I've been able to learn off of some of their hard lessons, I think I had a very effective transition from military service to civilian life.
Yeah, mate, that's a major problem in Australia at the moment. We have a really high rate of suicide amongst veterans getting out of the military, and this is what I think it is like when you're in uniform, right? You've got that sense of pride, you've got that sense of tribe, you've got that sense of purpose, and you always got the next course, you've got the next, training section, you've got the next deployment, you've always got something to look forward to. And when you separate from the military, all that goes away, right?
Yeah.
And you're back into the normal civilian population where people might not be as motivated. They might not be talking the same. They might not be thinking the same. And it's just people get stuck in this void of a very high purpose job, being around the mates, loving the guys, to a bit of emptiness as such, because there's no training to, and like I like to call it demilitarizing. There isn't that demilitarizing from the military to civilian life, and I think there's a big kick up at the moment in Australia of working that process through. But I read some of the reports from it, and I thought they were garbage. So I think they're missing the point completely. They talk about they pretty much blame veteran suicide. One of the reports that I read blamed veteran suicide on like the toxic masculinity of the military or some bullshit like that. And I'm just like, and man, I just sat there and I was reading it, and I'm like, if that's what they're gonna sit there and blame it on for veteran suicide, then they've missed the point completely. And that's whatever report that came out of the government is absolute horseshit. So. Mate, that's my thinking on it. I think there's a massive, loss of purpose and tribe, and it sounds like you've been lucky in that format of having guys around you that have done it and been able to show you as well.
Well, one of the reasons why I spend about 95% of my time in the United States, despite being a Canadian veteran and a Canadian citizen, is that one of the things I've noticed that's pretty common amongst Canadian veterans that retire is guys will, first and foremost, they identify as a victim because our VA requires them to highlight or champion or celebrate their worst day in order to get the support they need. So if you're constantly talking about your worst days, like when your back is the most messed up or your head is the most messed up, you start to become that. Our head and our heart doesn't know when we're joking. Like when we say, like most Army guys, they'll drop something on the floor and they're like, oh, I'm such a fucking idiot. Like I never speak to myself that way anymore because my heart and head doesn't know the difference. Second thing a lot of veterans in Canada will do is they'll move to a place that maybe their divorced wife's kids live there. And so now they move to a town where they don't have any buddies and they're incentivized to not work by the VA. And so what they'll do is they'll stay in their house and they'll take their money and maybe they'll do something with it, maybe they won't. But they sit and in order to try and maintain some semblance of the connection that they used to have with their tribe is they'll continue to reach out on social media. Now, this social media is a very polarizing platform in a lot of ways, especially what's going on in today's present day political climate in both countries, Canada and the United States. And they'll end up trying to find something to fight for again. And in a lot of cases, that ends up either fighting with their buddies on Instagram or Facebook, smoking a shit ton of government weed, because Canadians get up to 5 grams of marijuana a day to smoke from the VA. Like, I don't know how many people in their life can smoke 5 grams of weed a day. I don't know anybody that can do that and function as a human being. But that's what they do. They get fat, they fight with their friends on the internet, and they move to a town where they don't have any fucking friends. And that's like kind of been the Canadian sort of more or less, right? Now I come down here to Montana, and I'm surrounded. In this particular county that I'm in down here in Madison County, Montana, it is full. We could field a company tomorrow of retired SF dudes and agency guys if required. But the guys down here, for the most part, that's not the way that they operate. They've transitioned into things like now they are a full-time fishing guide, or now they manage ranches, and now they do pickup cowboy work. So I've got a whole handful of really great buddies down here that had the same downrange experiences that I did in a different uniform for a different country. And I've been welcomed with open arms. And instead of sitting around getting drunk or smoking weed all day, we've got elk to go chase and hunt. We've got brown trout to go catch. We've got horses to ride and cows to go care check and these kinds of things. So it's, even though it's not much by way of purpose, it's still a very active community and an active lifestyle that moves in the direction of leisure and tribe. And it's the healthiest kind of crew of dudes that I've been able to find. And that's why I spend most of my time here.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That's cool. It's really good to hear as well, because it sounds like almost the Canadian system, mate. Like and this is just me speaking of what I've just heard. Then it almost sounds like it's they just want to give you something to sort of shut you up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like especially with the weed, right? Like here, let's just give this guy some money. Let's give him weed. If he smokes that and he's not going to do anything, he's just going to sit around and be quiet all the time.
Yeah, I'm not, and another one too is you guys probably experience the same thing down there is the ubiquitous overprescription of pharmaceutical solutions to health problems, right? And I've been a guy, like I've done the whole pharmaceutical thing when I was in uniform, like they were giving me pills for depression and for anxiety and for pain and all this stuff. And I found myself, I'm the kind of guy that if there was a 1% side effect on a particular medication, I would get it. It got to the point where I didn't even need to look at what the side effects were. I could just take this pill for 2 weeks and tell you what the side effects were, because I'm one of those guys. I don't do any of that stuff anymore, man. I don't take any pills. Honestly, my frontline medication for feeling better in retirement is like my quality of sleep, how much exercise I get, and the kind of food I put in my body. Like,
Oh, mate, bang.
if I have a doctor that doesn't ask me in the first, like, say I check in with a new doctor, and if this doctor doesn't ask me in the first 10 minutes how my sleep is, what quality of exercise I'm getting, and then like how my social activities and these kinds of things are, if they don't ask me these questions, I fire them. I'll get a new doctor. Because if you're not looking at those as frontline medicine, it is medicine for these guys and what they're going through, then you're wrong, I think.
Mate, I 100% agree. I've had a lot of mates go down the pharmaceutical world, and it's been no good for them. I've also had mates go down the psychedelic world, and it's been very good for them. A lot of them had to travel to Mexico for it because they don't offer that here in Australia. So I've had a couple guys on the podcast, mate, that have actually done that, and they talk about they have these psychedelic drugs, and it's almost like doing 30 years of getting help from a doctor in like 6 hours.
Yep.
And these out of body experiences, and they can go back to these incidents that they had, and they can process them out of these out of body experiences, mate. It was I've done a couple great podcasts on them, and so there's also that side that the pharmaceutical world won't even talk about, which is which I think is a massive problem. And I think the biggest problem, I completely agree with you, is that when you go into a psych in Australia, and it sounds like it's the same in Canada, they'll prescribe you to drugs straight away. They won't prescribe you 8 hours of good sleep. They won't prescribe you a fitness regime. They won't prescribe you a high protein meat diet or just good food, good intake, right? Not processed garbage. And then they probably won't prescribe you like a time like we're doing now, right? With like me and you talking to each other, being around the buddies, doing stuff like you're doing down in Montana. You know what I mean? Like getting around the guys again, getting around guys of purpose, and keeping your mind active. I've found that a lot through my journey is, mate, I love running long distances, like 100K races, 115K races. I'll run these things for like 15, 16 hours. And I've found a lot of joy, and I wouldn't say happiness, I'd say more pride from it. I've found a lot of pride from, putting myself through these extreme events. But, because I don't run with headphones in, I just run with my mind. And on these long runs, my body gets at such a point where it's so exhausted that I can, that I think about all this stuff, and I can, it's almost like I can process past events through running these long races, because I get in such a point of exhaustion that like my brain just goes somewhere else. So, mate, I've found, and look, no, I'm probably the 1%, right? That is probably dumb enough to go out and run 100Ks, but mate, I've found a lot of comfort in that, and I'll probably do that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, man. I've got another buddy from down there. He's a big long distance guy too, and he said roughly the same thing. He raw dogs it. He doesn't listen to music or none of that stuff. It's kind of wild.
Yeah.
I had you spoke about briefly about like what the things that they won't prescribe you that are actually very helpful. Like, how is it that like the 5 grams of marijuana a day that I would be entitled to, were I to go get it, but they won't pay for me to go get a yoga pass. They won't pay for my gym membership. They won't pay for me to get a dietitian. They won't, I mean, it's very silly, the things that they choose to kind of pick and choose the battles they want to fight, right? And I think it's because of a pharma's bottom line up front is that there's more money in keeping guys sick than there is in making them healthy. I did have
totally agree.
I had a couple instances where I had the privilege to do a couple of psychedelic medicine journeys that were supervised. One was in Canada through a program called Project Trauma Support, where I did 2 ketamine journeys, and that was very, very moving for me. I was very scared because, like, obviously there's a bunch of crap that rattles around in my soul, and if someone wants to take the X200 Surefire and point that flashlight in the deepest, darkest parts of my being, I don't know what the hell's there. I've repressed that. I don't want to see that shit. And that was one. And I also ended up with a microdose regime in 2021 where I was microdosing psilocybin or magic mushrooms before bed to help with a traumatic parachute accident that I had sustained in 2012, which I got a TBI. because I used to get very, very vivid night terrors about that particular parachute accident. And with this regime, over the course of about 6 weeks, I was able to take it from a night terror to just like a normal nightmare to a dream to just a thought that didn't have any emotion attached to it.
Wow.
So with that journaling, and it wasn't anything cosmic. It was like, take it, do some mindful, like take this medicine with some intention, write some things that you want to accomplish when you go to bed at night, and you wake up in the morning, you're like, wow, like I'm getting better. It's fucking wild. It's fucking wild.
Mate, it's it's really, really cool to hear. You know, I speak with a lot of veterans as well, and unfortunately, a lot of guys they have to, you know, they don't work this out from doctors.
No.
They work it out from other veterans that have also been through it, and they've fortunately just stumbled across it. So, look, I think there's a massive issue within the medical community at the moment with how to deal with PTSD. I think there's too many doctors prescribing stuff too early. And mate, I had a friend on my podcast, and you know, we had this extreme incident overseas, right? That happened. We had three dudes get shot and killed in one night, and we're going through that incident, and you could see just the emotions coming through his face, and you know, all this memories coming back. And after the podcast, he actually said to me, he's like, mate, a few years ago, I wouldn't have been able to do that, but it's only been through. And mate, he sat down with his psych, and they were really, really good. They didn't prescribe him anything. They went back through incidents. They got him onto, I think it's called holotrophic breath work.
Okay.
So they got him onto that, which can like reprocess incidents. Yeah. And yeah, you know, he also said as well that the psych told him, and I stand by this as well, that the psych told him, he goes, if you understand what you military guys have at your power, and like you understand how to harness that and then control that, on the outside world, you will dominate. And I also think you need to hear that at the right time, right? Like if you heard that when you just got out of the military, or you know, close to that time, then you'd probably be like, yeah, get fucked. Like that shit doesn't work. But if you hear that at the right time, like I hear that now, and I'm like, man, there's so much stuff now that I can use from my military days with my long distance running, with this podcast and stuff like that, that I just think I can do far better than everyone else. So you've got all these things at your disposal as well from your military days that you can use all throughout your life. And yeah, mate, I totally agree with some of the stuff you're saying as well. It's yeah, and it's just disappointing to hear that we're not quite hitting it on the head at the moment within the medical industry. They're just going to prescription drugs and that sort of stuff to almost shut you up a bit.
I can say that like Canada is moving and conducting trials in the direction of using various psychedelic substances. MDMA was one that was years ago. Guys are getting prescribed MDMA because it opens up elements of your emotional space, because you can't really have any growth in a therapeutic client-patient relationship if you don't actually have an open heart or an open emotion to connect with your clinician. And so they were prescribing low dose MDMA because it makes you more, I've never done MDMA, but I guess it makes you more like lovey and open up, and the colors, you're kind of more emotional. And it was able to people were connect with their clinician a little more. I was like, okay, that's kind of neat. That's them taking a step in the direction of some newer medicine that might work, and they're trialing that step. There are now they're announced trials with the Canadian Veterans Affairs Canada where they're going to start trying psilocybin and things like that. Ketamine is still not on the books. And I just actually, last night, I went over to a ranger buddy's place. He lives just in town here. And I filled out the paperwork to go down to Tijuana to do that Ibogaine mission as well. We'll see how that does. I've got some demons that I think it would certainly benefit from that. I mean, like we all do. Like if you got to hear, you got to be ready, and you got to be open for these things at a certain time. You know, if you're to just take them and just go and do them without being in the correct mindset, it's not going to be as beneficial, if it's beneficial.
Yeah, mate. If you want to hear a bit of a review, someone going down to that area and doing Ibogaine, I did a podcast with a guy called Jeff Casson. It's number 31. And yeah, mate, half the podcast we talk about his psychedelic experience in Mexico. So that might give you a bit of a heads up of how it is. But mate, he absolutely swears by it. Says it was amazing. Says it actually saved his life. That was like his final straw of him. He'd done one tour to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan, came out and got into the police, did some investigative stuff there. And yeah, mate, he was ready to end it. You know, he actually planned out his suicide, left notes, and then this psychedelic stuff came up. He did it, and he's like, I got my life back.
Yeah, I got this building I live in is kind of cool, man. It's an old schoolhouse, and the guys that live on the next condo over are one guy was a retired sniper from the 82nd, and the other guy was a ranger. And those guys both went down and did it, and they came back like they're buddies of mine. I know these guys; they literally live next door, and they're different men. They're completely different dudes. They're like, "Bro, it'll change your life. You need to go do it." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay."
That's cool, man.
It's really something. So yeah, they kind of put me in the corner, and they're like, "Dude, you're gonna fill out the paperwork, bro. Like, you would really benefit from this. We want to see you do well." And I was like, "Okay, I'll give it a shot."
Yeah, mate, and I would like to stay in contact with you as well. I would like to see how you go with it. If you do go do it, man, I'd like to have you back on the podcast again to tell us about your experience down there.
Yeah,
that'd be cool. Mate, I just want to get on to a couple of heavier topics if you want to go there. Did you lose any guys when you were on any of your deployments?
On my deployments, no. But actually, we're coming up on the anniversary of one of my dear buddies getting killed in Iraq on the 6th of March, which is the day before my birthday. His name was Sergeant Drew Doiron, and that's coming up in a couple weeks. And he was kind of like we referred to him as the some of this because he was kind of an OG guy. The commandos stood up roughly the same time as CSOR did, so we're kind of in the same, like around 06 kind of time frame. And I was an 07 guy, so I was on the 4th course, and he was an OG when I got there, so he was a course 1 guy. And Drew was a big, larger than life dude. He would have been around 6'3" or something like that. Ginger guy, big friggin' red beard, lots of tats, big climber, stuff like that. Much of us, we struggled romantically, right? Like we were always in and out of relationships or getting divorced and all this stuff, and he was no different from any of that, but he just lived for the guys, you know? Yeah. And I remember I still had it back when I had Facebook. I remember like our last exchange because I was set to go over there. My team replaced his, or no, we were there within about 8 months or 9 months of that occurring. And I remember when we all got paged into the big arena hall at work, and they laid it down for us who got wounded and who got killed. And yeah, man, I've had a couple. This is going to sound kind of hokey or weird, but you did say it was getting heavy. One of the things I know I struggled with, man, certainly when I was in, was an element of a spiritual connection. I had found that as a young man going overseas and seeing what people would do to each other in the name of their holy book just really turned me off to all manner of spiritual connection. In the last couple of years, I have found great solace and great comfort in experimenting, being curious about my own spiritual health. And I've had a couple instances, man, where like I'm going to get choked up talking about it, man. But a song will come on the radio when I'm hauling stock. I'm a big game guide now. I guide bighorn, sheep, and elk and stuff like that for clients here in the Rocky Mountains. And once in a while, I'll get hauling stock out of the mountains someplace, and the song will come over the radio, and I don't even need to look who's riding shotgun because I know he's fucking there. He's been in the room with me before, and yeah, I miss him a lot.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, mate, like it's crazy, you know, how these emotions come back when all you got to do is just like mention his name or a certain song comes on. Mate, I get a very, very similar sort of emotion that comes back for me. I had a cousin, his name's Scott Palmer. He was killed in Afghanistan. He's like pretty much the reason why I joined the army. He was 8 years older than me. And when I was coming through school and that sort of stuff, I would always look up to him as like this hero figure, you know, like Superman. You know, when you're like 15, 16 and you just see someone, they're so much bigger and they're doing this cool job and they're sending photos of you over in Afghanistan. It was like that, man. He was like my hero, Superman. And I joined the army because of him. And it was probably, man, I think we were just getting ready for our pre-deployment training to go to Afghanistan when he got killed over there. And mate, I remember the night that I got woken up by my CO because we were on an exercise in the Blue Mountains, which is like west of Sydney, and it was freezing as middle of winter. I think it was -degrees. And about 11 o'clock at night, I'm like racked up in my little hoochie, sleeping under a tree. It's freezing as, and someone just comes out and says, "Mate, you need to come up here." So I walk up, and the CEO just said, "Do you have a cousin overseas named Scott Palmer?" I'm like, I just broke down straight away.
You knew?
Yeah, I just knew. I knew, because like, why else would someone come, and then why else would they say his name? And I just broke down, and then from there I got airlifted out back to base, and like I spent the whole night in my room by myself, like just sitting there and not sleeping, just like trying to process the information which had been told to me. And because he was such a hero figure, I was like, man, there's no way that he can die. Like the bullet would have bounced off him, or like what happened? He was in a chopper crash. And I'm like, man, like a chopper can't kill him. A chopper crash can't kill him. Do you know what I mean? That's the type of thought. I was like, he was too strong for that. And there's this song called, I think it's by the Dixie Chicks, called Traveling Soldier.
Oh, I can't listen to it,
mate. So they played that at his funeral, and whenever that song comes on, I can't control myself. I have to turn it off. Like
I can't. I'll be in a saloon here, and someone will put something on the jukebox, and that's one I can't hear. And I can't hear "Wish You Were Here" by Pink Floyd. I can't listen. Yeah, I hear you, man. Sounds like your cousin, my mate, fucking Drew, were similarly. Like it was like, there's no way this guy got shot. There's no way. Like, right? It's like that's not how he was supposed to go. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, mate, thanks for sharing that with me. I understand it's tough as well, bro, because like going through this podcast, I've had a few mates as well call me after the recording of it and just say, bro, that's tough to go through. I haven't sat down and spoke about that for fucking over a decade. Yeah. Especially one of my other guests, his name's Justin Prosser. He was the dude with the tie that you were talking about before.
And, I feel bad. I'm like the disheveled. I'm like, and all these other guys wearing suits and ties and whatnot.
Nah, don't worry about it, mate. But mate, yeah, he was on. He actually called me a couple of days after, and he's like, "Look, I didn't really think I had an issue with all my Afghan and military stuff, but clearly I do, because I've spoken about it for the first time in over a decade, and it sent me on a bit of a downward spiral." But he said, "But mate, like, thanks for having me on, because now I can actually, like, I know what's wrong. Like, I've admitted now what's wrong. Now I need to work out how to tackle this thing head on." So, yeah, look, mate, thanks for sharing that. I understand how like tough it can be, just through sharing my personal experience as well. So, yeah, that's mate, a huge effort. So let's get on to a bit of a lighter part, mate. You talk about selection a bit as well. There's a lot of people out there that love to hear the stories of guys in selection. So, mate, do you want to talk me through what your selection was like, and like maybe the percentage of numbers that you went through, and how long was the period, everything? Yeah. So, first thing foremost, I'm going to mention that I liked selection so much I did it twice. I wasn't particularly strong, I don't think. Certainly not on my first one. But I got very blessed because they had seen something in me, and they invited me to stay at the unit as a supporter, to work in like a UM shop, handing out batteries and hatch gloves and shit in between selection 1 and 2 for me. So in that time, I thought that it was extremely beneficial, because I got an inject of the culture that I was supposed to, like all these warrant officers that before you'd be like, bracing up and yes, warrant this and yes, warrant that, because the regiment, at least the training squadron, was run by warrant officers. Every cell was run by a warrant officer with probably a sergeant E6 or E5 underneath. And these guys were just SMEs, subject matter experts in their own particular domain. And when you got to get to know them as human beings, they're actually like dudes. They're fucking dudes. Like first name basis, and they're telling jokes and pranking each other in the office all the time. But obviously very serious, very professional, but they never lost that element of like, look, like we all know who's in charge here, but I'm responsible and you guys all work for me, but like we can also like have a good time doing this. And it's not, these are the guys you're expected to fight and die with, right? So you got to be able to call them by their first name. Selection has changed so many ways over the years that I can openly speak about much more of it now, the selection that I had gone through. And I also had the privilege to be selection cadre on 2 various different selections throughout my time in service as well. The funny story behind that is you get to a new squadron or a new SOC. We call them SOC, Special Operations Command.
or Special Operations Company, and then they recently changed them to squadrons. When you get to a new squadron or new SOC, the sergeant major pulls you in. He's like, so, Wilson, what do you want to do with your time here? And I would tell him the normal bullshit stuff. You tell your sergeant major, like, I want to get my zero gravity combatives fighting course and underwater knife fighting and all these other stupid courses that don't actually exist. But they also told him, like, hey, the one thing I'm not interested in doing is being an assessor on selection. I don't want to be cadre on selection. I hate seeing guys suffer. It's twisted. I think it's fucked up. I don't want to do it. So lo and behold, I found myself as an assessor on selection within about 2 weeks. And the reason for it was, I was like, and I one of the sergeant majors, his name's Mike. We had dinner here a few weeks ago. I was like, why'd you do that? He was like, well, because we don't have to worry about guys like you. Like, I know you'll do it because you're professional, but there's some guys that want to do that, and the guys that want to do it will take it a little bit too far.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, some guys just love screaming at dudes and watching them go through the hurt. The first selection that I did was it's 21 days long with a few admin days on either end. So the actual selection period is about 15, 17 days, depending on range, assets, and all these other things. And it's supposed to be an individual assessment selection program, but most of, if not 90% of it is done in teams. There's some things that are done by yourself, and they put you through all kinds of, obviously there's fitness testing and whatnot to make sure you're good enough to go and get in the door, which is the runnings, push-ups, pull-ups, all that shit, and then a weight load march for time for 13 kilometers with 77 pounds before your water and your weapon, or at least what it was back then. And then we kick off pretty much straight away as well. You get the brief, and then you go into kind of almost like a lockdown mode where they don't tell you what's going on. You don't get any direction. It's leadership by whiteboard. You show up for your weapons draw timing at 03 or whatever timing it was. All of the food. So one thing that they never did for us that they've changed a little bit now, as I understand it, is they don't restrict food. So at meal times, you're allowed to eat whatever the hell you want. You can throw shit in your pockets, doesn't matter. Like we don't restrict our guys on food. We'll restrict them on sleep and other things, environmental clothing and stuff like that, but we don't really restrict them on food. There are other selections across the world where your caloric intake is measured right to the calorie. And that's just, I don't know why or who decided that was the way they were going to do it. Because it's interesting to see, because some guys either they'll break because they don't get enough sleep, and some guys break because they don't get enough food. Like, it's not so much the PT or the tasks, but if you take away one of those two things, it was kind of interesting. Phobia testing right away for heights, water, confined spaces, which I didn't know I had a phobia of water until I did a water phobia test. That was pretty wild. I drowned a couple times on that. I was pulled out of the pool, resuscitated, and asked if I wanted to continue twice on my first selection and once on my second selection. And I said yes, which really, it was just, I think they just wanted to see if I was stupid enough to keep going, and they were right. There's some other stuff too. You do a bit of training on foreign weapons. When they condensed that selection from 17 days down into like 8 or 9, I was really wondering, because I was a staff on it this time. I was like, how the hell are they going to compress 17 days of shit into 9 days? Well, they did it, and they figured it out. And so instead of doing like, one really hard attribute like every other day and walking or running everywhere across base, they would bust them and do like 2 or 3 hard attributes a day. So it was pretty cool. Yeah, some of them you're wearing some boxing gloves, and some of them you're trying to not drown, and some of them you're in a dinghy in the middle of a river, that kind of shit. And we'll often run them in some particularly environmentally challenging times of the year, like in the fall. My first one was in November, so Canada November is pretty shitty. It's it might be above freezing during the day, but then it might snow at night. All of your stuff that's sweaty gets frozen, and so you got to kind of keep moving in order to keep warm. Once your stuff gets wet, it gets extra heavy in your rucksack, but you can't wear it when you're moving because you'll overheat, that kind of thing. And then we'll run the other selection. Normally we'll run 2 serials. We'll run the other serial in like May. So it's similar, where it gets nice during the day and chilly at night kind of thing. Very cold at night, sub-zero for sure. And that kind of shit. So it does work. And I'm going to say too, this is going to sound very, very crass and derogatory, for any of the listeners that are maybe interested in things like that, because I get hit up a lot, like, hey, what kind of boots should I wear in selection? I was like, I don't know, dude. Ones that there's no magic bullet, because selection only serves 2 purposes. The 2 purposes it serves, one is that to find out that you're not a pussy, and the other one is to find out that you're not retarded. That's it. Like, if you're not those 2, you'll probably do okay. And so that's kind of what I say, which is not, obviously that's not the politically correct way to say what's the point of selection, but it's like they want to make sure that you're not a wimp, and they want to make sure that you're a reasonably thinking person under duress, lack of sleep, lack of food, that kind of thing. Your physical composition is the only thing that you can control when you go into a selection environment. The only thing you can control up to the day you show up is what kind of shape you're in when you get there. And I'm not talking just shape like know your knots, read your machine gun PAMs, know your small unit tactics and these kinds of things. Having said that, if there's something that they want you to know, they will teach you everything you need to know. Everything. And you'll be tested on it later, probably at 3 a.m. under a headlamp on how to tie a bowline knot for time, but they'll teach you everything you need to know. So you don't need to come from a combat arms background, although it does help. Like you are inoculated to stress, you're inoculated to physical elements of that pain and that moving through the dark in the woods with all of your heavy crap on and not knowing what the fuck's going on and sleeping in a hole in the ground and all this other stuff. It's good. It's good to get used to that and good to know it for sure, but it's not critical. Some of the best operators I know were radio operators, or another guy was a naval acoustic sensor sonar operator. He was a whiz kid on selection. Just one of the best operators I've ever seen. Just awesome, smart guy. So yeah, mate, selection.
Yeah, mate, I like how you summed it up there in a very unpolitically correct way, but I think that's the best way to do it, right? Is you can't be a pussy and you can't be retarded. And there's so many politically correct words thrown around today, but you've just summed it up so perfectly within like 10 words. And mate, you can't be a pussy and you can't be retarded. And that's what they're trying to work out.
Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, because we've got lots of really, really smart thinking, critically minded individuals that are in really fantastic shape. And third to that, maybe even more important, because those are the two individual skills, like my individual traits. I'm not a wimp and I'm not stupid. On top of that is your ability to gel within a team of a whole bunch of different types of guys. Yeah. Like, Sam's in charge, and now I've got to be a good follower for Sam. And then someone will blow the whistle, and now I'm in charge, and now you've got to be a good follower for me. Like that kind of thing. Being able to flex into various parts, regardless if you're a fucking O3 or an E8 or an E4, right? And you got to be able to take up everybody else's job and be a follower and help your fellow buddies and gel as a team. That's the non-dualistic part, but it's part of the greater sphere that they're looking at for guys to be able to do that. Because we've had dudes that were just absolute whiz-bang soldiers, like just really sharp, knew all their knots, their boots were always tied properly, their shit was always packed, but they just couldn't gel as a team guy. No one wanted to work with him. He just had a crappy attitude, or he couldn't laugh. And humor was a big part of it too, because if you can laugh at something when you're dog tired and you're hungry and you don't remember what day it is, and they took your watch so no one knows what fucking time it is. If someone can crack a joke and you can have a couple of guys chuckle, that means you've still got some gas in your tank. If you can laugh, it means you've got some spirit and some heart left in you.
Yeah, and I think it also shows as well that you're not a social hand grenade. Like, people don't want to deploy overseas with people that just are very awkward and they can't get along with them. So like, you have to be a guy that's open to that type of humor, that maybe that dark humor, because man, I'm telling you, some of the darkest humor I've ever seen was over on Afghan. And you have to be able to laugh at shit, because if you can't find it funny in that point in time, like, who are you going to complain to when you're overseas in Afghan? Fucking nobody.
No, yeah.
No one wants to hear your shit over there. So, yeah, if you can get put through it in an environment like selection, then they can weed out the blokes that might be a social hand grenade, because if they don't get along with everyone, they're not going to get along with people over in Afghan as well, or Iraq, or some of the stuff that you've done.
I do find that now that I'm retired, and when I look at the mindset that I was in when I was a young operator, going through the process and going on all these cool courses and stuff, and watched a couple guys thunder in on my second parachute course, my free fall course. Watched 2 guys die. They were civilians, but they were on the drop zone, and the dark humor shit that kicks off straight away. When I look at how I was using dark humor as a coping mechanism at that time in my life, how much that sets me back today if I were to still make that my frontline coping mechanism for elements of stress that I deal with today. In the greater, more kind of mature mental health sphere and wellness sphere that I live in now, I'm really curious about, I'm really careful about my dark humor, because I don't want it to distract me from actually processing an event later, because it might just bottle that stuff up and I might not visit it and process through it. So I'm actually very curious about that stuff now, which is kind of an interesting thing.
I can relate a lot, especially that dark humor as well. Yeah, mate, I can. Like, I'll give you two examples, right? I had a friend of mine overseas in Afghan. He was in a car that got blown up, and he got his front teeth smashed out, and a bit of his neck was damaged and his lower back, and I think he broke his jaw. And I seen him 2 days later in Afghan, and we were going out on a job, and he was coming back in, and we're at the same base. And I walked up to him and laughed at him for getting blown up, and I took the piss out of him. And like, man, I look back on me then, and I'm like, you little prick. You do you know what I mean? And like, another incident as well. We were, because I'm paraquad, we were doing a parachute jump in far north Queensland, above Brisbane. And the dude that was jumping next to me landed awkwardly and broke his back in 2 places. And when I landed, took my kit off, walked over to him, he was screaming, and I'm like, mate, shut the fuck up. Stop screaming. And I feel like so bad for that. I think that guy listens to the podcast as well. So, mate, I am sorry if you're listening, but I just had no feeling to that whatsoever. I was just like, there's a job you got to do, so you need to shut the fuck up. And I just stuck my hand up to like one of the corporals. He got the sergeant, and I had no sympathy for him whatsoever. But I look back on that time, I'm like, man, you were a fucking tough little bastard then. And one of the things I've really needed to do now is like process those things, not be so harsh on people, because that was a military way. You just whatever, bro. Next job.
It's you're right, man. And so you've identified something that's really interesting, is being able to forgive myself. Old me, for like present me can forgive younger me because of the lack of maybe wisdom or experience, or I was just in that zone, or that was my job, or that was how I was trained to react, or that's how I was.
Yeah, the military needed you to be like that as well, right?
Having said that, now I look with maybe not disdain, but I'm like, I wish I had to handle that differently. But that's okay. That's maturing and gaining wisdom. And I look at things that I've said to people that were in a similar vein like that. Like, I was like, who the heck was I to speak like that to that person? And, I put myself in their shoes now. Like, imagine one of my buddies comes up and my leg is broken and I'm screaming because it's fucking really painful. And all of a sudden my buddy's like, I'll be like, man, what a dick. Like I could see that. I could be that guy. I could be both of those guys. And so I give myself a lot of grace, and I give grace to those who were that way when they were that way. And like, I don't know how old you were at the time, man. I was a young man once too, and I made stupid.
I was 20.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. So it's okay. Like, I forgive.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I've actually I've reached out to the guy that was in the IED blast to try and get him on the podcast. I don't think he's quite ready for that type of experience yet. But I'm definitely going to, keep reaching out and keep asking to have him on, because I think it's an important discussion for him to have. Also for me as well. I actually want to apologise to him face to face, but I'm sure that time will come, and I'm looking forward to it as well, mate. I just I want to move on to some of your stuff post Afghan and Iraq, some of the stuff you've done down in South America, these like Latino countries, and because it's really interesting of what's happening in that space at the moment, right? With the Biden-Harris administration, the border. There was a lot of debate about that border for a good year running up to this election, or the previous election that just happened. Now Trump's come in, and it seems like, well, from what I'm reading from independent news sources and not just from the Australian media, because the Australian media is very, if you've seen it down here, it is very, very one way. Like, they do not like Trump at all. So it's all just bad reporting on him, which I think is a problem in itself, but that's another discussion to have. But from what I'm seeing is that he's shutting down the border from that southern end, right? He's putting troops down there, and it's because of the amount of fentanyl that's getting crossed into the border into America, killing something like 100,000 Americans per year. Also the human trafficking, child trafficking across there. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, but you've done some work in there. You can't say where or what type of work, but in a very overarching way, can you tell me, some of the stuff that you've done down there?
Yeah. So my trips to Latin America were predominantly countries that still have some attachment to His Majesty's Commonwealth. Mexico was not one of the countries. Mexico, I think, is a completely different ball of wax. And when we look at Mexico from, and this is just my understanding, taking my lived experience there, taking what I've absorbed in the news now, and then taking what I've seen as a frontline sort of my attachment or because I'm a recovering street drug addict myself, and seeing what happens to people that end up on the bad end of like street drugs and whatnot. Is we had understood years ago, at least the time when I was going down to some of these countries, that there is a problem with a very porous border into the civilized West. And by civilized West, I mean Canada, North America, Canada, America. And there are very strong networks from both some sub-government or some government not so sanctioned, but at least corrupt governments that know these things are taking place. And so we had gone down to do things like bolster hands and feet training of various counter-narcotic law enforcement and military units in various countries. We had also engaged with them and some of their leadership and middle management on effective planning measures. We would also assist them in planning on some live operations. And in some cases, none of the ones that I were on, but it can be said that we have been able to facilitate some of those operations with our own collection of data for the host nation to execute some of these. And by execute, I mean operate and deploy on some of these target sets. And so that's kind of the stuff that we were doing down there. In preparation for that, the command had sent me to government language school to sit in a little classroom with a Mexican lady for 10 months for 8 hours a day and learn Spanish. And nice. And to go down there, and the majority, actually some of the coolest stories, I've got some friends that live in this part of the state, and we'll sit around a campfire up in the high country on the horses or whatever, and crack open a bottle of whiskey, and I'll listen to some of these. And I'm not like, mine are low level, mine are like kindergarten stories compared to some of these other guys that have spent years in places like Peru or Bolivia and stuff like that. And some of the stuff that they had done as just like the lone white guy in a weird village that had a lot of influence and that kind of thing in fighting against these corrupt government entities, these corrupt cartels that were kind of trying to overthrow an otherwise legitimate government. And the government didn't have the means, the money, the troops, or the training to combat these cartels or these shadow governments. Really interesting stuff. It's a lot of really crazy gray area shit.
Yeah, I could imagine it would be, because you're going in there with, like, I don't know what your orders of opening fire would be, like where you can cross the line, like anything like that, right? Like you're not fighting a conventional force, and you're going there to train and help someone. So especially when you're in those like by yourself grey roles, that would be intense. I've
never done any by myself
yeah.
like that. Now, some of my buddies have, but I'm not. Obviously, those are their stories to tell. And one of the things, though, that's often missed is the capacity that one or a team of SF guys has in a space. And it's not because, like, politically it looks really bad if white guys are going to get zipped up in body bags and sent home to Canada or Canberra or DC or whatever, right? But what we can do is we can take these 6 white guys and we can train and equip and field 1,000 local national fighters. And those local national guys, they're going to know what streets are good to go and which ones aren't. They're going to know the cultures and the customs way better than I ever will. And if we equip these guys and select the smartest of these dudes to go and do our bidding on our behalf for their own country, that force multiplier is something that cannot be, you can't even imagine the effect that has in the space. It's not white guys Jason Bourning it through like fucking Boulevard. It's training 1,000 police officers a little bit better, so that they're a little bit better makes the whole unit and the whole mission more effective.
Yeah, and it's a snowball effect, right?
Yeah, that's the juice that we're really getting. It's not white guys going and jumping into helicopters into the jungle to go knock off drug labs. It's not. Like it's Because guess what happens after 4 months? We all go the fuck home, right? Yeah. They live there. And if you can give them some lasting skills and really tap into the really smart guys and give them a taste of what it could look like, how to save their own country, they will take that initiative and that is inspiration, and they will run with it. And they're going to be able to do far better for their country than we will.
Yeah.
They know, and maybe sometimes they do, when their countries do better, mine does better. America does better. Australia does better. If we can help them fight the bad guys at their front door, that way it doesn't come to our door. That's one, that's good. And two, you're empowering these people to go and do it for themselves, which it's like anything else, man. You're teaching a guy to do it for himself. That's going to be way more useful than us doing it for them. And that's the Special Forces kind of mission.
Mate, I just want to ask you a couple final questions. What do you think about Trump and then pretty much declaring war on the cartels? Like, is this a really good thing for that part of the world?
I don't want to put a nail in a coffin of a really great question, man, but the best thing I've done for my mental health since retirement is I don't watch the news and I don't track that stuff.
All right.
And honestly, I would not be able to give you an informed opinion, even if it was just my own, dude. I don't. And it's not me trying to like shirk your question. Yeah.
That's all good, brother. That's all good. Mate, I'll wrap this up with one final question. I ask this to all my guests. So if you could give your 18-year-old self one bit of advice about life, what would it be?
I've been thinking about this a lot because that's a really good question. I think that no matter what, do your absolute best to find out what your authentic self is and never betray that. Because I have spent so many years and so much of my own personal emotional bandwidth trying to figure that out and trying to be someone else that I thought someone want me to be. But I think at the end of the day, now I'm pushing 40 and just be myself. Just be your authentic self.
Well, brother, thank you very much, mate. You've been a fantastic guest, and I couldn't have asked for a more authentic and open episode with you, man. So, and I understand, it can be pretty hard with you sitting over in Canada and me sitting in Australia and doing it through a laptop. So, brother, thank you very much. And I would love to have you back on again when you go for your psychedelic treatment to let me know how that was.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mr. Have a wonderful day.
You too, brother. See ya. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And for more information, head over to our Instagram at Two Worlds Collide Podcast. Take care.